Hello, my name is Rodney Prince, SBI number 333765, who is currently incarcerated at James T. Vaughn Correctional Center in Smyrna, Delaware. Um, this recording is to talk about we trying to get people to come out to sign a petition about getting the shoe shut down. So I'm gonna talk about a few reasons why it should be shut down. On the same day that I was sent to the SHU, February 21st, 2024, I was on the same tier that Corey Pitts, SBI number 888603, was shot in the face with a shotgun loaded with the beanbag. As a result of the shooting, Corey was informed that he would have to have his eye removed. He is currently awaiting eye surgery. When he was returned from the hospital a few weeks later, he became my next door neighbor and rec partner. One day when he was coming back from the shower, Corey complained to the officers that he was feeling lightheaded and suffering from a massive headache. As the officers removed his handcuffs, he passed out in the cell right there in front of them. The two officers laughed at Corey before slamming the door and continuing on with their count. Several of the inmates who had inside record at the time was able to get another officer's attention and inform them of Corey's need for medical attention. Corey was eventually sent to an outside hospital and admitted for several days. The two officers involved were not disciplined for their actions. Corruption by staff members is a way of life here. Staff members make up false claims against inmates all the time, and the only means we have available to complain about this abuse is the grievance system. However, inmates cannot grieve a disciplinary infraction, and all legitimate complaints, such as Corey's, is titled staff complaints by the grievance officer and immediately close with no one getting held accountable for their actions. With this current grievance system in place, there is no way for inmates to adequately report a complaint against staff members, and Internal Affairs don't investigate complaints against staff members, only complaint against inmates. In the past year in the SHU, I have personally witnessed staff members mace and assault several cuffed inmates and falsely claim that they were the ones assaulted. This is what they call active resistance. By claiming active resistance, it makes the prison seem more dangerous than it actually is, and it also helps with federal funding. Unlike other states, officers here are not required to file a use of force report, and they are not required to weigh their mace canisters after use to determine how much of the chemical was used on the inmate. This practice is for inmate safety, which is this practice is for inmate safety, which this institution could care less about. Two of the inmates that I personally seen be abused by the staff was Zaki Lloyd and Jaquan Crump. This new warden, Brian Emmett, has come into the prison with old ideas for the SHU. Currently, he is trying to bring back the quality of life program that was dismantled after the Classy vs. Coop settlement. During that period, inmates spent 47 hours in their cell before giving 1 hour out for recreation time and showers. Inmates were only given one phone call a month. They were only allowed to spend between $10 and $40 every 2 weeks for commissary, depending on which level they were on, and they were only permitted one visit per month. Every Tuesday and Thursdays, the hot water was cut off, so inmates was forced to either take a cold shower in frigid winter temperatures, or wait another 47 hours until their next hour out. Depending on which level you was on, between 1 and 4 would determine if you could have your electronics. On April 25th, 2024, during the Offender Advisory Council meeting, which was recorded and published in a prison newspaper, Warden Emmett was asked to look into building-wide shakedowns that recently took place, explaining that residents had properly destroyed. Excuse me, I'm going to say that again. Warden Emmett was asked to look into building-wide shakedowns that recently took place, explaining that residents had property destroyed, and in general, most felt like it was not really a shakedown, but an act of intentional disrespect. Ward Emmett responded by stating that he came to this prison not to make it fun, but to run a safe facility. He used the recent overdoses in the institution to justify his officers' conduct. These officers shook down every building within this institution, leaving a mountain of destruction in their wake. This this administration exploit the disciplinary process, the SHU, and the classification system to get rid of inmates that they don't like. For example, when an inmate is moved to the SHU, he will be punished multiple times for the same offense, and the counselors are complicit in this practice. First, he'd be housed in the SHU under horrendous conditions, such as having to sleep on a chair with both rodents and birds. Next, the inmate will have to serve a sanction. The sanction can be anything from 15 days to 6 months. When serving a sanction, the inmate is barred from using a phone, instant messenger, buying food items on commissary, or using a law library app on the tablet. Next, the inmate is reclassified. But to justify housing the inmate in a SHU, the counselor uses the inmate's age, the severity of his current offense, which he is incarcerated, and the time remaining left on his sentence. These are items that should only be used during the initial classification into the prison. These points are combined with whatever points administration decide to give the inmate for the new infraction. With this current system in place, administration will always find enough points to justify keeping the inmate in the SHU. 17 points is considered max, and an inmate can only earn negative 2 points every program or academic course that he completes. However, those points are only limited to a negative 2 points per calendar year, no matter how many programs or courses he completes. So if an inmate is classified with 19 points, he will be stuck in the SHU for the next 2 years because he's only classified once a year unless he is granted a 6-month review by his classification counselor. Finally, the inmate will have to navigate making it through the 3 buildings in the SHU. An inmate will have to spend 120 days between the first 2 buildings, 120 days each between the first 2 buildings before spending the duration of his time in the SHU in the last building. The only way out of that building is to be classified out. The independent review team final report completed in 2017 after the uprising, written by former United States District Attorney Charles Oberly and former Judge William Chapman, recommended this institution to change the classification and grievance systems and to break the code of silence, which expects officers to keep what happens behind the prison wall out of the public's view. Officers and inmates are both concerned about retaliation if they report an officer or staff member per the report. This report also noted that their recommendations mirrored those concluded by another independent review following the rape of a staff member and a murder of an inmate in 2004. Twice this institution was encouraged to change its classification and grievance systems as well as their related practices, and twice they chose to ignore it. Cruel and unusual punishment is measured against the evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. If you put an inmate in an environment such as the SHU, where there's not an opportunity to be interactive, stimulate their thought process to grow, they start to decompensate. And then that increases their risk of self-harm. That increases their risk of hurting others. They literally start to shut down from both an emotional and intellectual standpoint. Governor Mayer went on NBC 10 earlier this year and stated, this institution isn't about punishment, it's about rehabilitation, and every single inmate is eligible to participate in every job and program being offered here in the prison. However, that statement was a lie. Had he toured the SHU, he would have realized just how big of a lie that actually was. Discrimination is also a quality of life here. Out of 2,500 inmates, Sergeant Payson is solely responsible for job placement in this institution. 80% of the prison is black or men of color, yet 90% of all skilled positions are held by white inmates. The only jobs that Sergeant Payson thinks that black men are qualified for is in the kitchen. I'm a certified CNC machinist and programmer who is overqualified for any position in this institution. However, in my 2+ years on the compound, I wasn't even offered a building job in my own housing unit. Sergeant Payson repeatedly told me that I was at the top of the list for all skill positions based off of my skill set. However, I was never even given an interview for those positions when they had openings. In the summer of 2023, the previous warden and current commissioner Robert May sent me from the compound to the MU for simply asking for a job. I spent over 2 months in the MU without receiving a single infraction for this incident. A few days after the incident, Counselor Thornvaughn seen me on rec and asked me, "Why are you back here? Because I know you don't get in trouble." When I explained the reason, she responded by saying that I already heard about it. Instead of getting upset, I asked her, "Then why am I back? Why am I still here?" She said, "The warden is just being petty. Continue to keep your nose clean, and hopefully he'll forget about you long enough for me to get you back to the compound." Eventually, it was a captain who advocated for me to be moved back to the compound, not the counselors. Within an hour of me being sent back to the compound, Warden May came to my chair and sat in a chair directly in front of my cell door in an attempt to intimidate me or traumatize me further. I went right up free for over 5 years until I was targeted by a single officer by the name of Weldon Hall. I received 3 write-ups in the span of 2 months. In the first write-up, the officer claimed that I threatened him, but the write-up was tossed out because they knew that he was lying. The second time, he shook down my cell and reportedly found a piece of wire that inmates use to get better reception for their radios. The cell was virtually undisturbed. He literally went in there to find something to write me up for. I was found guilty of the infraction. The third and final incident involved a conversation that me and him had while I was in the commissary line. After this conversation, he once again claimed that I threatened him. None of the other officers present backed his story, and all of my witnesses stated that we were simply having a conversation. The write-up was virtually identical to the first. Lieutenant Phelps stated, "Either admit to what my officer said and go to the MU, or deny it and go to the SHU." When I denied it, he escorted me to the receiving for processing back to the SHU. During our walk, I asked him, why would you threaten me over an accusation? He stated that I didn't threaten you. I said, telling me to admit to something that I didn't do or go to the SHU would be considered a threat anywhere in America. 2 days later, I found out that Lieutenant Phelps now claimed that I also threatened him. This is what you call stacking. Write an inmate up for as many things that you can so that at least one of them stick. During my disciplinary hearing, I got Officer Hall to admit that he once again lied on his report. He also stated that the write-up should be reduced to a Class 2, which is a minor infraction, because he may have misinterpreted my intent. The hearing officer, Sergeant Coviello, who is now the SHU commander, refused to reduce the infraction and found me guilty. During my second disciplinary hearing, also heard by Sergeant Coviello, Lieutenant Phelps admitted that he told me to either admit to what my officer said and go to the MU, or deny it and go to the SHU. That statement is a clear violation of the inmate's due process, which should have gotten the write-up thrown out. Concerning me threatening, he couldn't remember what I said, but he felt threatened. He felt threatened by an inmate whose hands were cuffed behind his back. Sergeant Coviello found me guilty of this write-up as well. When I was reclassified, I was given 19 points. 9 of the points was due to my age, time left on my sentence, and the severity of my offense for which I am incarcerated. Recently, I was denied a 6-month review, meaning that I would have to do 2 years in the SHU for a lie. Due to my last classification in March, I now have 17 points. A 6-month review would have had me back on the compound by September. On May 19th, I asked Counselor Thornvaughn to place me into the same program that she made available to other inmates with my same classification status. She told me that I don't meet the criteria. I responded by telling her why I should be placed in the program. She responded that the decision was made by upper management. Disciplinary history was not a factor, and she stated that she was not my counselor. After questioning what was a determining factor, I reminded her that she wasn't the other inmate's counselor either, but it didn't stop her and Lieutenant Scott from going above and beyond for him. This was all documented on the tablet. I also talked about the advice that she gave me after Warden May sent me to the Mo. She stopped responding. This, it's counterproductive to have the governor say that everyone is eligible for jobs and programs in this institution, then deny me the opportunity to do both. The SHU was built to house the worst of the worst. However, it's being used to warehouse inmates for minor infractions so they continue to receive federal funding. Instead of dismantling the SHU, calling in an exterminator, and turning the building into regular housing units to adapt to the overcrowding and ever-growing population, this administration tried to come up with clever ways to keep the SHU filled by shuffling inmates back and forth between the SHU, the MU, and the compound. Half of the time, the tiers in the SHU are virtually empty until they find a way through deception to fill them. I wonder what would happen if everyone in the prison was classified to medium status. How would this administration handle that? Then again, they would never let that happen. In building 18, in building 18 B tier, where I was housed in the SHU, let me get it again. In building 18 B tier, where I was housed in the SHU, was infested with rats. They would come into my room and leave droppings on every level shelving unit in the cell. I woke up the rats literally jumping out of my closet.
You have 1 minute remaining.
I woke up the rats literally jumping out of my closet when they turned the lights on at 6 a.m. in the morning. Finally, I had to barricade my front door with bags of paperwork to prevent them from coming into my cell. I had written and personally spoke with Sergeant Coviello concerning both the birds and rodent problems, but he told me that once he informed maintenance of the problem, he could care less about the issue. This was recorded on December 5th, 2024 on the tablet. Bird droppings can be seen all over the inside rec cages. During video visits with my family, I would have to avoid being shit on because birds flew back and forth overhead. I also filed a grievance and submitted a sample of rat feces in an envelope wrapped in cellophane as proof. However, Sergeant Burley, the grievance officer, said that she said that was unnecessary and inappropriate because before dismissing my grievance as a staff complaint. Rodents carry hantavirus, which is directly transmitted through contact with urine, feces, saliva, and bite. Inhaling dust from contaminated urine or droppings can be serious or deadly. Bird flu is transmitted by having close contact with infected birds, especially during an outbreak. You can also contact the disease by touching bird droppings. Because of my complaints, Sergeant Coviello kept me in Building 18 for 5 months, which is well past the 120 days based upon maximum security housing rules. This was retaliation for using the grievance system. Sergeant Coviello's inability to properly address this issue is placing hundreds of lives in danger. Touch on another subject. This institution has refused to appropriately use funding for which it was approved so that they can have reciprocal funding that they can split amongst the staff at the end of the fiscal year. For example, when this institution was given funding for cable TV, Major Schaefer spent the money on another project. That's why he's no longer working in this institution. But instead of replacing the money, this administration elected to simply go without cable. SCI has both cable and a movie channel. Howard R. Young has Netflix, multiple music channels, and multiple religious stations. Here, we only have Channel 19, which is an internal TV network. Due to a previous lawsuit challenging this institution's decision to edit movies and TV shows without approval, this institution retaliated by playing the same 2080 movies for the past 2.5 years. Movies such as Die Hard and Speed. We haven't seen a new movie in that same time span. Delaware Unified Correctional System and the mandate governing the DOC ensure that all institutions within the state operate under the same standards and regulations. Both federal and state laws establish minimal standards to protect the rights of incarcerated individuals, and these standards are expected to be applied across facilities. CRIPA states if a pattern of rights are certified in certain facilities, the DOJ can take action to enforce compliance in the treatment of inmates. Furthermore, the introduction of electronic devices in prison is measured against the evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. All of the prisons in the surrounding states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, all have cable. And due to the antenna problem which plagues this institution, we're without channels such as ABC and Fox. Not one building in the institution has the same channels, including the compound, which is clearly a problem. Given the fact that cable television has been approved for and fully funded for this institution for over the past 4 years, there's no excuse for us not to have cable. Furthermore, you have to question why this is the only institution in the state that refused to release inmates early to level 4 work release or home confinement. Every Thursday, when the list comes out in the paper, it never has inmates from James T. Vaughn Correctional Center. If an inmate do make it to level 4, it's because he did every second of his time here. This facility is 100% about punishment. I was once released home directly from the SHU without any rehabilitation, no mental health treatment, and no programming. The question becomes, who would you rather have returning back to your communities? A person with no rehabilitation at all, or someone given all the proper tools available to be a productive member of society? You decide. I'm done.